Welcome to Schoolhouse Rocks on the Right Team podcast, where we celebrate the people, programs, and stories that make education the heartbeat of our communities. Every school has a story. Every classroom has a purpose. And behind every student's success is someone who chose to make a difference. Whether you're an educator, a parent, a student, or someone who simply believes in the power of learning, you're in the right place. Join us as we go beyond the headlines for conversations that inform, inspire, and remind us why education truly shapes the future. I'm David Weaver. Thanks for listening, and welcome to Schoolhouse Rocks here on the Right Team podcast. Well, it is truly an honor and a treat for me today to welcome my good friend, my former boss, I still call him boss actually, and fellow sports fan, none other than Dr. Jerry Gibson, to today's Schoolhouse Rocks on the Right Team podcast. Dr. Gibson has been a school superintendent in Texas, most notably for me at Marshall ISD for 5 years, from 2016 to 2021, where we worked together through some good and some trying times in education. Semi-retired now, Dr. Gibson is a graduate of East Texas Baptist University and is still looking for that hole-in-one on the golf course, I understand.
That's accurate, yes.
Dr. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. I still call you Dream. So, Dream Weaver,
I don't
my
know
good
that we
friend.
have I don't know that we have enough time on one podcast to talk about everything that you and I packed together, working together in 5 years. Not to mention the ensuing 5 years of just friendship back and forth. But it seems like we've known each other forever. It's
That's
really only
true.
been
Yeah,
about 10 years, you know?
been 10. Yeah, it's
Literally right about 10 years, right about this time of the year.
yeah, it'd be about 10 years in a month, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's about the time in 2016 where you came to Marshall, where I already was as director of communications, it was really my first experience in public education with a superintendent change, where you go from one guy to the next, and so you really don't know what to expect. And lo and behold, I get you dumped in my lap, and the wild ride was on. So it's I look back to that with fondness.
I do too. It is certainly. There's times in interviews now where I'll say, "Well, would have been your highlight if you had to name one thing?" And I would say, "Well, I really have to name two." But I said, certainly it was my time in Marshall because of all the things that was accomplished for the students there, and a growing relationship with the school board and feeling like you're a part of a community. Going from a lot of people don't know the story. I got there and oh boy, about the time you unpack all your boxes and get your furniture set up and your house set up, and you learn how to get to an office and everything. And then the ratings came out, and come to find out we were a half a point from previous from the previous year. What I inherited was we were half a point from being academically unacceptable as a school district, which would have been in today's terms, an S. So we were a D minus. And you know, what do you do but roll up your sleeves and go to work? And but to go from there to where we ended probably would have been about a B plus during that time as well. I know we're definitely rated a B, but um, so yeah, it was. But and the other one was even though it ended poorly and it was unbelievably hard, was Galveston. The fact that we passed the largest bond there in the history of the city of Galveston. The city had never, or the college there had never passed one where those students get what they deserve, which was a new high school. And so those were certainly the two biggest. But yeah, we still look back on fondness. Still have good friends there. Yourself and you know some board members I still talk to from time to time. And yeah, it was challenging but fun and very rewarding for those students. Definitely.
It really was. It really was. And we're going to get into some of that here as we move along. I did want you to kind of start us off here, kind of give us a little bit of your background in terms of the early days and what made you become an educator, and then we'll get into your run of superintendencies around the state, and but really, you know, I, and I know some of it. I honestly don't know a lot of it, honestly, but probably that's a good thing. But to know too much about a good thing kind of thing. But anyway, just kind of tell us how you became an educator and what got you into the field in the first place.
So I was an associate pastor, if I remember right, at a very, very small church in Groves, Texas. And my mother worked at a private school, which was literally 2 blocks away at a different church. And I saw so I was over there from time to time when I go visit her, where they needed a football coach. It was just a little flag league. I think they only had 7 people out there, if I remember right. It wasn't 11 man or anything. But man, I just love I'd say it's volunteer. I'll go do it in the afternoons and evenings and what have you. And I just love the scheming and trying to, come up with your game plan and your scheme of the game plan and trying to beat the guy on the other side. And I did that for a few years and really just fell in love with it. And I guess it never really got out of my system. Spent time in ministry, pastoring some churches and what have you. And I just felt led to go back and try to make a difference in the lives of these students and through the coaching. And that's really all I ever wanted to do. And so, I started out coaching I did private schools. I did a couple of schools in the Houston area, one in Beaumont. And back then, private schools, the ones I was associated with, they didn't have very good insurance, if they had any at all, or even a retirement plan. And I just made the conscious effort to go into or the conscious decision to go into a public school education to try to provide, a retirement one day and have insurance and everything else. And so after chasing that yellow bus for several years, I had an opportunity to really, Dave, I went in and I got my principal certification because I thought it might open the door for an athletic director's job. A lot of people want the mid management and everything else. Um, but I did it because I thought, okay, if God ever opens the door, either for an AD or for school administration, I just want to be ready. I want to be prepared. And so that's why I got that. And sure enough, the door opened in a school district, an inner city school in Beaumont that had been academically unacceptable for 5 years. And I was hired as an assistant principal, and we tried to turn it around, and we did. We did it in 1 year, and then continued to make strides. And I went out and became a principal of a little rural district who was also, they had faced the academically unacceptable thing. And so, we went to work there and we turned it, or we went from academically unacceptable to recognized and eventually to exemplary. And I kind of got the reputation then of kind of someone who could turn a campus around. I got to go to Waco, and then I think I supervised 13 campuses, I'm not mistaken. Um, and I think 9 of them were academically unacceptable. And so we began to work with those campuses to turn those around. And in 2 years, I think we got it down to two or three. We had a lot of improvement. And um, that's when my mentor, Bonnie Kane, who lives right up there by y'all in Longview, she called me to her office and said, "You need to, it's time for you to go be a superintendent." I said, "I didn't want to. I really didn't." I remember that conversation so well. I said, "No, ma'am, I'm really not interested. You got your certificate?" "Yes, ma'am, I have the certification, but I'm not interested in being a superintendent." And she said, "Can I ask you why?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am. I see how this school board treats you, and I don't want to be treated that way." And she stopped and she said, "Well, thank you for saying that, but some of them are good out there." And Waco's wasn't bad. They sometimes school boards kind of get in their own way sometimes, and but as administrators we get in our way, we get in our own way too. So you just have to learn to wake them, to work with them, and the ebbs and the flows. And I went to Cold Spring and Cold Spring Oakhurst on Lake Livingston, and did my doctorate while I was there. And I met a man at a conference named Dr. Draper, who had been in Marshall. And he asked me if I'd ever considered going to Marshall. I said, "No, not really, not one time." And I said, "But they have a superintendent." He goes, "He won't be there long." And sure enough, that was in January. And in March, I saw where Dr. Smith, Mark Smith, who had been there for, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years, I guess, something like that, 3 or 4 or 5, went to Duncanville. And I remember we were on a cruise, spring break. I'd finished my doctorate, so finally I could go on a vacation again. And we'd cruised with my son and daughter-in-law down to the Mexican Riviera. And I just, when I go on those things, I put my phone in my safe, and I give that time to Tammy. And when we were going into port, I turned it on. I had messages, and one said Draper, and I went, "Oh man, I know what this one's about." And so he he said, "Hey, I want to share your name with them." And I was like, "Oh, Draper, I don't know, man. I don't know." And so he did. And I don't know, a few weeks later, I'm in my office in Cold Spring, and Dr. Nichols just gives me a call. He told me he was going to be the interim in a few weeks, and he's going to help them with their search. And he told me, he said, "Will you tell me a little bit about yourself?" And I did. I remember we talked 45 minutes, and he said, "Well, here's what I'm going to ask you to do on behalf of the school board. I'm asking you, would you please consider applying for this job?" And I said, I'll commit to two things and two things only today." He said, "Well, okay, what's that?" And I said, "I will commit to visiting with my wife about this, and I will commit to praying about this." And he said, "I'll take it." And so he called me back 3 days later, and called me back 3 days after that. And he called me back 6 days after that. And I said, "Dr. Nichols, the job's not even posted yet." "What?" So we go through that. But long story short, yeah, I came up there and interviewed. And Dave, you know what? I know this is supposed to be educational, but it's going to be spiritual too. It's your show; you can edit it out. But sometimes you just feel the hand of God. You leave. I left there feeling like this is. I could just sense the spirit of God there, and so that he called that afternoon and he said, "I get Dr. Nichols." He said, "I guess you know why I'm calling." I said, well, you're either calling me to say, they're not interested or they're interested." He said, "No, they want you to come back 2 weeks from today. I'm not going to tell you where you finished or anything." He said, "But I'll let you pick when you want to come." And I picked the last schedule of the day. I think it's about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, maybe something like that. I don't remember exactly. And, we had prayed about it and felt led. Um, and I still remember, that we had worked some things out potentially salary wise and some other things. And they said, "We want to offer you the job, but," and you know this story. I've told you a couple of times. I said, "But we want an answer today, and we're not going to let you leave the building until you answer. If you and Tammy," and she was sat there right beside me in that second interview, "need to go into the office over there and talk about it, we're fine with that. We're going to be here waiting." And I remember it so well. I acted like a little baby. I said, "Well, we've prayed about this, and we wouldn't be here today if we didn't feel led, and so we'll accept your offer." And then I broke down, started crying, and I said, "But I want you to pray for me because I've got to go." Our little granddaughter had just turned 5, and I said, "But I've got to go home and explain to a little 5-year-old why Granddad and Gammy are going to move further away from her." And that gets me still right now. And but we just felt led, and we went. And it's I've never had anything. I've never gone to a situation where it was as smooth as it was. And I'm going to go back to being in God's will and part of God's plan. We started looking for a house. We found a house. It didn't I didn't appraise at what we offered, and I had the best realtor in America, Brad Burris, working with me, and there was no conflict of interest. It wasn't anything. I asked him if he would help me, and he did. And he explained to the guy, "Look, this is what it appraised at, and this is what he can do," and boom. And we were able to offer a little more appraised value and put a little more down. But and the move was smooth. It was the smoothest move we've ever done. Just everything A to Z. I still remember people. We were living out in Shadowwood. You've been to my house several times out there, knocking on our door, saying, "Welcome. We're going to go to what's the hamburger Juicy's and get a hamburger. Can we bring you and Tammy one back?" And the next, I think Sunday was July 4th, if I remember right. We got up, and went to Emmanuel Baptist Church that day, and same people said, "Hey, we're going to go out and watch fireworks out here," and we felt welcomed. And but that's kind of how education that led us to Marshall.
Yeah, and it was a great time. And you mentioned Brad Burst. Of course, Brad was and still is on the Marshall School Board, doing a great job there. He wasn't the president at the time. That was a wonderful lady, of course, Helen Warwick. But
Ellen
Brad
Moore, yeah,
is now the school board president there. But when you get right down to the education part of it, the situation, and you kind of described it in Waco a little bit, and this has kind of been your lane. You're a turnaround guy, right? I mean, I think that it's correct to say that you have, whether that's something you want as a label or whatever as a leader, but you are a turnaround guy. The districts you have gone into have needed to be turned around academically in various stages of development, and Marshall was certainly in that. You did mention Dr. Mark Smith, and I would be remiss about in my appreciation for him. He was of course the superintendent that actually hired me in Marshall. Had never been in public education, and he took a chance on me as it was his first superintendency, and he and I used to always say we're kind of in this together because this is our first go around, and we actually managed to get a school bond passed there after two tries. First one in over 40 years in Marshall. And of course, you know this, when you do things like that, especially as a superintendent, your name gets out there, and usually the bigger dogs kind of come calling, and that's what's kind of happened with Duncanville. And he of course, it was an offer he couldn't resist, right? And so that's how Dr. Smith left. But then that leads us to, you mentioned the way God works. You came into my life, and we became good friends, and actually
Very good.
worked together there at Marshall. But the kind of the ironic thing is, you mentioned the academic challenges that faced you when you got there. You also got really put into a situation where you were picking up and kind of taking the baton of getting schools built. The bond had
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
passed, and but not a single foundation or brick had been laid when you got there, and so you kind of had to get yourself up to speed a little bit with that, what was going on there, while also focusing on the academic side of it as well, because that's kind of why you were brought to Marshall, was to kind of get that turned around and headed in the right direction in time to get into those new schools.
Yeah. If I remember right, Travis, they had poured the cement, had a little bit of steel up, and PTY, Price T Young, I think was in the pouring process. That was it. Crockett was clearing land, and of course, the middle school was, they were just, I don't even know if they'd turned dirt over at that point. I'm really not sure if they had or not. And then we then also turned the dirt over for the wing. This was during the school year actually, because they did the work in the summer at the STEM campus. Um, and to add that wing there. So yeah, it was from almost the beginning. Yeah, there was just a little bit of concrete down, and that was. I remember I was asked to speak one of the times we had opened some buildings. I guess it's into my first year, and we had already seen some academic improvements. We'd gone from 6 campuses that were improvement required down to one that first year. And someone said, "Well, how did you do that in these buildings?" And I said, "Well, I was diagnosed a long time ago with ADD and ADHD. And I said, I've never outgrown that. That's still it's still a struggle when I'm trying to do something around the house. I'll be working on something, I'll see something, I'll just drop it and do it. And I said, I just use that to my advantage. Because of that, I need to be in short meetings, not long meetings, because of my attention span. I said, so I would move from one thing, I could go to another, and it was so I just tried to play it into my advantage. I still remember that I was speaking it was at the Methodist Church. I think it was a ladies group, and Helen was sitting next to me because I was just sitting that evening, that afternoon, whenever it was, on a couch talking to people. And someone leaned over to her, and she goes, does he really have ADD, ADHD? And Helen looked at her and said, "You can't tell? Just keep listening. You'll figure it out." So yeah, we just kind of used that stuff. I used it in my leadership to my advantage. We need any advantage we can get. Um, yeah, that was. And then you'll remember, of course, the middle school getting so far behind. We had to delay the start of school for what did two? I think it was 2 weeks. It
It
was
was
that
after Labor Day.
it was after Labor Day
We
because we
started
couldn't get.
the week after Labor Day.
Yeah, I remember because we had hired Coach Mathis, and we are trying to get the football program back to what it used to be. And I said, "Hey," I said, "You notice that we're not going to be in school." I remember sitting in his office. You might have gone with me. I can't remember. And I said, "Well, the UIL rules. If you're in 2 days, there's no time. Back then there was. You can practice all you wanted. The 2 hour, the 10-hour rule, as it was back then, was only when school was in session." I said, "So you can still have 2 days that long and get ready for basically Longview, because we hadn't started school We played the first game. I'm trying to remember who we played the first game. I don't remember now. Um, and school hadn't even started yet. And then we had Labor Day, and then we had Longview. And so, yeah, I still remember those things there for sure.
Yeah, I believe that was I don't want to say challenging because, and I was very grateful because you had a key. Well, here's what I was grateful for, and I tell people this all the time. The best the best leadership to work for and with is a leadership that trusts you to do your job, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And then my job is to make sure that I keep that trust. And from day one, you came in and you kind of let me um, use my experience and what I had learned, and of course, being from Marshall, um, I kind of had a finger on the pulse of I think what worked in that community a little bit, and you leaned into that as well, and I appreciated that more than probably I ever told you, but that was a challenging time in that, and we all know now. I mean, you and I, when we were growing up, we went to school, Doc. I mean, we that was commonplace. Right. I can't tell you how many times I heard people say, well, we did this all the time growing up. We started school after Labor Day.
Yeah.
Labor Day was the traditional end of summer, and end of summer break. But over time, we've gotten back, to where that's not done anymore, especially around here. And the biggest challenge we faced in that, and that was just not worrying about getting the buildings open, was keeping parents from storming the gates because they were ready to get those kids back in school. And so you have to kind of balance that a little bit nowadays with parent schedules, and that was an interesting challenge that I don't know that I've heard that much around the state anyone else has had to do recently, just in terms of pushing their school year back. And the flip side of that is when you do that, you of course have to stay longer than everyone else. So I think we were still in school after Memorial Day and into June. I
Well,
believe
it
we
probably
went for a
one
weekend.
another week.
Yeah, I
Well,
think it
if I
was the
remember,
first week of June.
yeah, necessity is the mother of invention, and so it was necessity. We didn't get the keys to the middle school. I remember they kept saying we're gonna be ready on time, and I kept walking through that building, and a lot of times that was the people need to know the bad thing for you was a lot of times when I went somewhere I said, "Come on, you're going with me." Like when we thought Crockett was on fire, you remember that? I still tell that story. You
Yes.
were definitely prayed up when we got there that day.
Yes.
Um, but one, you needed to be able to tell the story of whatever I was seeing. Two, you could help me and grab me and keep me quiet when I need to be quiet. And I kept saying, Dave, I just don't see how it's going to happen. And I was talking to Robert, who was our Robert Will Banks was our construction manager. I said, I don't. There's no way. Finally they came to us and they said, yeah, we're not going to be able to do it. And I think that was early August, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Maybe late July. I went probably the July school board meeting, late July. And, you know, I knew it and I just said, okay, guys, let's get together. And that's one thing I tried to always do. I'd get my cabinet back together and say, okay, here's what we're looking at. How do we solve this problem? We couldn't get the keys to the building. And so that was the only way that we could do it. That was the only way that we could start school. And we expanded our day a little bit. We had to do that because we were on minutes back then. So we had to expand our day and get through. And hopefully we didn't have any bad weather, and which we didn't. We finished probably the end of the first week of June that year. It was the latest I've ever gone. But like I said, we didn't have a choice. It was what it was, and had to make the most of it. And yeah, you're right. Parents, a lot of them, they set their work schedules around the school
Sure.
schedule, and we had approved that calendar, man, back in February or March or maybe even before that, and we had to adopt a new calendar. And people, but there wasn't anything we could do about it. There was the only thing we could do about it. We talked about this, and I remember kind of visiting with the board saying, we got two options. One, everybody can start as normal except the junior high. Well, man, that's
Yeah.
not good, especially if you have a child at two children at different campuses. I just didn't feel I felt like we really, and if you'll remember, we had also gone through that year of rebranding a lot of stuff where every school mascot was no longer their mascot. which, Dr. Kane had taught me a long time before that. The hardest animal to kill is a school mascot. And we said we're going to be the
Absolutely.
Mavericks through and through. Or actually, we had decided that before I got there.
Mm.
That had been decided. And still think it's a great thing. We're going to have the same logo, we're going to have the same mascot and everything else. And so, um, yeah, we didn't have a
Yeah.
choice though. And so
We had bears and lions and raccoons and everything at the elementary schools.
every animal,
I
yeah,
remember
every
that
animal,
for
yeah.
sure.
It's
And so as all of that was going on, as I mentioned, you had academic challenges in the
yes,
district that we had to get fixed. The buildings were one thing, and I still believe to this day, and that buildings are school buildings are, especially modern buildings, are very important in the overall learning experience. And just in Marshall, I mean, we were dealing with schools that were almost 100 years old, a couple of them, and there were many more that were 60, 70 years old, and the argument that, well, there's still good buildings, you can have school in them, only fly so far when you're dealing with an educational environment that requires so many different things that you can't provide in those buildings because you just can't do it because of their age. And so providing the modern school building environment and all that came along with that was critical to this turnaround part of this. But what was in your experience, just in general, when you go into a place where there's obvious academic issues that need to be corrected and put in going in a different direction, what's the biggest challenge that you face or that you've seen that most turnaround districts see in those kinds of situations?
well, it boils back. A lot of times we lose focus of why we're there. And I think to some degree that had gone on. It had gone on at a lot of other places where, uh, you're going to be one of two things. And I went in there and I met with every principal and I met with every director in the district during that summer. I had about 3 weeks that I worked when I was, they had approved my contract. The contract didn't start till July 1st. And so I had 3 weeks there and I try to take advantage of that. I met with all of them in the conference room one at a time, one on one. And I asked every one of them a question, every single principal, every single director, every assistant superintendent that we had at the time. I said, are we an adult centered district or a student centered district? And I said, let me explain. I said, when we make decisions, do we make decisions that are best for students or best for adults? 90% of them, that was their answer was, a lot of them, I remember hang their head saying adults. And we had to get outside of that mentality. That's usually what leads to it when we begin to make decisions that are not best for students. That's not our focus, and so I think that's what I've seen more than anything else. That we make decisions that are best for you know local businesses, people. I mean, teachers. When I was in Waco, I remember one time I went into Waco High School and they were working on their master schedule. Their principal had left, and I looked on the board. I said, "What exactly is that?" And they go, "Well, that's our master schedule," and it was pretty bare, and it had conference periods for the teachers and lunch periods for the teachers. And I said, "That's what you have, nothing else." I said, erase all of that. That you're telling me that whatever decisions you make on that master schedule are going to be what the teachers want, who they want to have lunch with, and who they want to have their conference schedule with. So they were already thinking, I'm going to make a decision that's best for the adults, not the students. And you have to get that mentality that, we're going to have a united plan. We did that as well when I went there. We said we're going to lay down 5 non-negotiables. And I still remember, we laid them down. This is what we're going to do. Boom, 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 boom. And we trained the campuses on how we wanted to do it and what we wanted and why. Some, as you remember, were a little negligent or late to the party on some of that stuff, and which created some issues that we just don't want to do it. That's an adult decision, not a child decision. You're making this. So I don't want to do it. That's what they're saying. Not I'm going to do it because it's best for the children. It's best for our students. And so that's really what usually begins the a downward slide when you're looking at things the wrong way. And that school board, I've talked a lot of times to various places, and when I got there, and I'm not trying to make anybody mad or anything else, but the facts are the facts. That school board wasn't known as being one of the best. In fact, a lot of people say that they was one of the worst in East Texas. And they got better every year. We did training. There was trust that was earned. There was crucial conversations and it was them towards me. Sometimes it was me towards them, and what have you. But every year, I will tell you, Dave, every single year, that school board got better and got better and got better and got better. And every year, our academic rating got better and got better and got better and got better. And they transformed their way of thinking as to what is best for these students. And I'm not going to say it was always easy. Yeah, I still remember one year, probably year three or so, if I remember right. Brad had become the board president. So Helen was trying to transition off the board. I think in Helen's heart, and we had a lot of great conversations. I love her so much. In her mind, she was transitioning to Virginia because that's where her grandchildren were. And her son was out there as a lawyer, and her daughter had stayed out there. She went to school out there and just stayed and everything. And so she was trying to transition off the board. And so she was not, she said, I'm not going to run for president. Well, Kathy Marshall was the vice president, if I remember right. Brad was the secretary. Kathy said, I don't want to be the president. So I think some people talked to Brad. I did not. Some people talked to him, and he said, all right, I'll take it. If y'all nominate me, y'all want me. And so, but Brad came to me in early, I always remember the week of Christmas, the week we got out before Christmas, rather, because we had a school board meeting on Monday, and then state championship game started on Wednesday. So if you could just get through that last school board meeting, because once you start those state championships, you're going to be out by noon. I always remember this: noon on Friday, noon on or 12:30. We shut down at 12:30, and I would tell people, "We're leaving. We've worked hard for a semester. We're leaving at 12:30, and we're going to shut this place down. We're going to get on with our holidays." But Brad came to me the week before and he said, "Hey, what if we did this?" He said, "I know there's money for when we travel and we do this and everything." He said, "What if we have a meeting?" And our meetings got shorter where we were getting in and out in 45 minutes to an hour and everything, taking care of the business of the school. And he said, "What if after we do that, we go that Italian place down on the square? I forget the name of it." He said, "Let's just go in there and have dinner for Christmas. Bring your spouses. Everybody's going to bring their spouse." And he said, "We're not going to talk school. We're not going to talk about the meeting we just had. We're not going to talk about things. We're just going to talk about life and about our families and anything that comes up that's non-school related." I remember that so well. And I was like, you know what? I think it's a great idea. Let's do it. And we did it. And that's kind of what our board had transitioned to. We would go and make decisions that were best for children. And they became such a great board. They became such a great board, and I tell people that still to this day. I'm thankful for them. But that's to answer your question. When your board and your community and your principals all together make decisions that are best for children, that is the key to it, and everything flows from there.
And it develops a team mentality
Yeah.
and we all know the power of a team working together is one that can accomplish pretty much anything. Because we did have some talented people on that team in Marshall, as far as educators and I'm talking teachers in the classroom. I'm talking campus administrators, district administrators. You had put together a pretty good team. There were some of them already there. They just kind of again needed to find a spot on the team and that they fit into and I don't know, 2 years into it, we'd seen a tremendous switch in terms of success. We were heading in the right direction, to say the least. And then that third and fourth year, we really made some waves across the state with our ratings.
Yeah. I remember TEA being there that first year, and I had to sit down and say, "This is our plan. This is where we're going. This is how we're going to do it." And I remember them saying, "Hey," them telling the board, you've got for the first time, you got a plan, a turnaround plan, and if you follow that, we're going to leave you alone." And there's a few times also, though, and you'll remember this, that They randomly selected us for various audits and what have you. And I remember it was because it was the day before Good Friday that we were getting out, and I emailed the commissioner. I developed a really good relationship with him, and I said, I need you to define the word random for me. And I said that if you I mean, how is that we were asked to do a special ed audit? We were asked this audit, this audit, this audit. I said, I don't see how our name randomly comes up, that much. And I said, and I remember telling him, I said, if this was a middle school, this would be considered bullying. And then I sent that and we drove down to my son's. It was his birthday. So we took him to dinner and then Easter was coming up. So the next day was Good Friday. And I got an email back from the commissioner and he said, you're 100% right. The way we do it is basically, he said, they pick where they want to go. And we weren't ever messed with again after that. We were held accountable, don't get me wrong, but we weren't because we were spending time doing that instead of working with our kids. It was taking away from our mission and everything else. And so, yeah, it was, those last few years, it was, here we go. We were asked to speak. Helen and Ted Huffines was on the board, and we spoke at the school board conference. The three of us presented there and shared some things that had happened when it come to finance and some things that we had done. And yeah, we were getting a really strong reputation.
Yeah, and I've been called naive a lot when it comes to this, and probably am in many ways, but because I'm not an educator by trade, I'm a communicator by trade who communicates hopefully well about educational issues. But to me, it always seemed, and I kind of believe this, and I think I saw it play out in front of my own eyes there with our experience. I believe that most children, most kids, that's their desire is to be the best they can be.
Yeah, no
And,
doubt.
and, and, and it's not like they come to school looking to fail or looking to make bad grades or looking to not be considered academically, eligible and things like that. But they need leadership. They look to us as adults and they say, show me the way to go and I will get us there. Show me the bar and I'll reach it. But if I don't know what the bar is, then I don't know where to go with that. And it creates confusion in a classroom or in a school. And confusion, by definition, doesn't lead itself to academic success. And so that's kind of what I learned in my experience working with you, working with Dr. Smith, there for a short time at the end after you had left Marshall, working with Dr. Langley, that, kids are just looking for us to set a bar for them and they will do everything. Most of them will do everything they can to reach it, but they got to know what the bar is. And I think out of more than anything, uh, in your leadership in Marshall, you did a tremendous job setting the bar both every year. Okay, hey, here's what we're shooting for. But we all knew overall what the goal was as well, and we saw the kids take on that challenge and reach for it themselves. And next thing you know, we have no campuses on the improvement required list or whatever it was at the time. We got them all off of that
Yeah.
in a very short amount of time. But I believe it. I believe personally, just in watching it with my own two eyes, that that's what you have to do. You have to give the kids a goal, and kids will do everything they can to reach it. I mean, we see it in our own homes, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's with discipline. It's like if you don't set discipline in your home, the kids don't know what the boundaries are. But you give them boundaries, then they will do everything they can, most of them, to stay within those boundaries. But how can you expect them to know what to do if you don't set the boundaries? And so again, it falls back to what we're doing as adults in education.
I'm glad you hit on that. If anyone that knows me, I know I love being around the kids. That was my favorite thing, favorite part of my day. I remember one time I was late for a photo shoot outside. I think we're doing the buddy benches at Crockett, and they were waiting on me. And I was in the hallways with the kids, talking to kids, messing with the elementary kids, and having fun and loving on them a little
Well,
bit.
what would
But
I tell you every single day when I knew you were having a bad day and you were struggling? What would I tell you? I'd walk into your office and I'd say, okay, put
we're on
everything
campus.
down, go out to a campus and be with the kids
Yep,
because that allowed you and really allowed all of us to plug back into why we were really there.
no doubt, no doubt.
I'll take credit for
I
that.
remember the first thing you would, yeah, and I appreciated that. And I remember I tell people, what do you do when you get down and get discouraged? I say, go where the kids are, because they energize us and it reminds us the priority. This is our focus are these children. But I went to the first volleyball game. Tammy and I did when I just got there, and there were some school board members sitting, and I think I was kind of expected to go sit around them and mingle, and I always come in the back door and everything, and I just started talking to the kids and asking them about, and that was always my routine. Anytime I went to a ball game in the gym, was work my way through the kids and ask them about their testing and about that. But one thing I really believe, and I would ask them, especially our high schoolers, do you know our academic rating? Yes. What do you think? And I think those who really understood it, they were embarrassed that they were going to a district and sometimes a school that was, not average. It was below average and it was failing and everything else. And it bothered them. It really did for those who could grasp it and understand it. And so, but uh, you can get your administration to buy in, you get your school board to buy in, you can get your campuses and your teachers to buy in. But you're right, you got to get your kids to buy in. You got to get the students to buy in and want to be the best that they can be. And heck, Dave, when you went to school there, and I was introduced to Marshall when I went to college, starting in '82 at East Texas Baptist University, and Marshall had a great reputation. They were strong in athletics. They were strong in the band. Great, firsthand how good the band was. Your father-in-law led it for all those years, and we were good in fine arts. The choir, wow, I remember going. That was a highlight of the year going to a choir concert in Marshall, Texas, and but we just never somehow, and there was still that pride in those areas, but somehow the academics had we weren't it wasn't the pride of East Texas, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted Marshall to be the pride of East Texas once again, overall as a school district, and have that great reputation that it had prior. And so, I think it's back there. I know I had been gone a little while, probably a year and a half. I still remember this very well, and I, follow things on Facebook or whatever, and people are talking about how they can't get a house. They go on the market and they were getting sold fast, fast, fast. And I remember texting Helen, and I said, she was off the board at that time, if I remember right. And I said, "What the heck is going? Y'all people selling their house that fast? Because that was never really an issue, I don't think. When I was how fast." And she said, "When you have good schools, people will come." And then she wrote, "Thank you." And so, you're right. The kids want to rise above. The kids want to go to a great school. I really believe that.
Yeah, and man, we have so many stories we could tell. Some of which probably you and I need to take to our graves. But
Probably.
we had and I want people to know out there, this man, you can be his friend and you can go to church with him. But when it comes to the school district and our careers and our jobs and what's best for kids, he'll hold you accountable. I learned that a couple of times the hard way, and I think it strengthened our friendship actually, for that tough love to happen in a couple of instances. I'm a little hard headed sometimes when I say you let me do what I want to do, and I kind of push the edges of that boundary in and of itself a little bit, and I found out right quick what the boundaries were. So, but I want everyone to understand that as far as a professional, when it comes down to, and when Dr. G says it's all about kids, and that's his singular focus, for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, when it comes to running a school district. And so, I do appreciate that. Here, years later, it didn't feel so good at the time, some of that, but it was tough love, right? It was tough love.
Well, I got that from, we can sit here, we can talk about the fondness and the turnaround and the successes, but there was a lot of pain along the way. And, I got tough love from the school board. There's times that they had to, rein me in and say, whoa, 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 slow down or do, this. But one thing we did, um, I can remember so many times that I'd tell, okay, the board, this is what we're going to try. We're going to do something different. And it didn't work. It backfired. It blew up in our face. But I use it the term, we owned it. I would say, well, that didn't work, board, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to fix it. We're going to do this, 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 this. But I had always learned, I learned it from my mentor, own your mistakes, own your mistakes, own your mistakes. And I think that shows transparency. And so, but yeah, I mean, believe me, I had some community members that would hold my feet to the fire, and I had some board members that would do the same. But I feel like majority of the time we were on the same page. We are definitely in the same book in the same chapter. We just had to sometimes get on the same page, and sometimes that meant others adjusting. A lot of times that meant Jerry Gibson adjusting. But we did it, and it was a really, like I said, I look on it fondness. I tell people all the time, if I could turn back time, I'll fill out applications now, and it said, "What was your reason for leaving?" And I put a moment of weakness. That's what I'll put, or you know, you look back because the last few years haven't been that fun and haven't been that successful, and yes, we can sit here and remember with fondness, but yet there were also struggles. There were
There were.
also hard times. But those hard times make you appreciate the good times a whole lot more.
Some of the hard times, I think, as I look back now, I even look back on those with fondness because you know, I,
Yeah,
I've learned so much now as I get older, and people say I'm way more sentimental than I used to be. But I think I've always been sentimental. It's just I've been hard headed and stubborn. I didn't want to see what was happening as I lived through it. But now, when you look back, some of those hard times are really what makes you a better person, a better educator, a better friend, you're grateful for those as they kind of become blessings.
yeah,
One of
I
those
agree.
times, one of those hard times, I wanted to touch on here because I thought your leadership during this particular time was tested, and I thought you came through it. Again, I'm very biased because I was on the team with you, but you came through it there with the COVID, the challenge of
Yeah,
COVID that happened. And boss, you and I both know that hit us like a ton of bricks, like it did everyone. I mean, it's not something that you could ever see coming. And just to kind of give people a quick rundown as to what the situation was for us, if you can remember, everyone will never forget probably what happened where you were when you realized what the gravity of that situation was. We were literally on spring break in Marshall.
yeah, that's right.
The middle of spring break, I'm sitting in a restaurant in Longview and I'm looking up and they've got I think it was an NBA game yeah, it was an NBA game that was being played. And all they could talk about, all that was going across on the scroll was this COVID thing. And, we had heard about it, but like other things, it's like, okay, well, that's happening somewhere else. It's not ever going to happen here. And then by the next day, and certainly the day after, we were on conference calls trying to figure out what we're going to do because every school around us was starting to close.
Well, yeah, they originally said you're going to close for a week. So
Mhm.
we were on spring break and we weren't going to come back for a week.
And we framed it. We did frame it because we were on spring break, and so we just decided, hey, we're just going to say we're giving the kids an extended spring break while we figure this out. And next thing we know, it's 2 or 3 weeks of extended spring break, and the big, and I'm going to tell on you a little bit here from behind closed doors. You were adamant because of our mindset of where we were academically that we couldn't miss class time. We needed kids in school. And so you as superintendent were having to weigh the fact that we couldn't afford to miss class time in Marshall ISD and school. But on the other hand of that, there was this gigantic health scare and health crisis that was going on literally around the world. And that was a tough call. It was a tough call in that we had been so geared toward academic success and rebuilding and turnaround and all of that, that you almost don't want to admit that sometimes you have to make a decision again, ultimately in the best interest of kids and everyone else around us at that time. It was a tough call, and the more we kept trying to kind of buy some time, it became evident that this is not going to work in our favor.
Yeah, and I remember, and while we were shutting down, there were still times that, as a cabinet, we would come up on a Tuesday afternoon or a Thursday or whatever, and because there was things that were still going on, and I remember this very very well. I had four priorities between that was middle of early March through June. And that was, you hit on the first one. We can't afford to lose instructional time. So we had to, every day was a new thing. How are we going to do it? And some people they were good. They had the Teams meeting or the Google Meets or this, that. And, some teachers still hadn't gotten there, with their technology, and they might have been doing worksheets, they might have been doing what have you, and making notes, but we were just trying to make it up every day, trying to just get through. So that was number one. Number two was I was, and there was three parts to number two. I was worried those seniors, and so I remember meeting with I think the class officers and some of their parents, and Tina Brown was the high school principal at the time, and I just said, I think you'll remember this day. I said, I'm going to promise these seniors three things. Three things. One, what was it called that they did the honors group, the top 10 banquet? Is that what it was called? Yeah, we're going to have a top 10 banquet. I don't know how, but we're going to have a top 10 banquet. And the second thing was, I want to say it was the baccalaureate service was very important in that community and very important to the school district. And I said we're going to have we're going to have baccalaureate as well, and those kids are going to. No, it wasn't baccalaureate. I'm sorry, it was the senior breakfast. That's what it was. It was a senior breakfast, and then the third one was we're going to have graduation. And man, we had to get outside the box because we had the top 10 banquet at the Presbyterian Church. What's Cumberland Presbyterian Church out, I think in their parking lot or in their. I remember that. We did I think it ended up their senior breakfast might have ended up being a drive-through. I'm not sure. I want to say we still did baccalaureate, if I remember right. I could be wrong on that. But then, of course, graduation, we moved it back. We needed the time. We had to wait for them to say, kind of give not an all clear, but a semi clear. You remember they said, okay, your restaurants can open if you do this and this, and then they started. And I remember meeting with Brad, and we not Brad, our he was our maintenance head of
Brad
maintenance.
Ash.
Brad Ash. I said,
Yes, sir.
how are we going to do this? Because we remember we had the 10-foot rule. So we sectioned off the stadium. I think we gave everybody 10 tickets, if I'm not mistaken, and we put them in pods basically, where their pod was 10 feet across from others, and to have you, and traditionally 90% of the people were in the home side, but there was always some that came to the visitor side. But that we used that entire stadium, and instead of doing it on a Friday night, because of course it gets hotter the longer you get, I was really concerned about people falling out, and so we did it on a Saturday morning, thinking it would be cooler. And it was cooler until about those last 15 graduates walked across the stage, and it began to get a little more intense. But those were the things that we were going to get through. But then you got the challenge of reopening the next year. And I remember this. I mean, how do you've heard me say, how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And once again, Andy Chilcote was now at Central Administration by then. Of course, you're still there with me, glutton for punishment. Anika Perkins was there, and we just took and our nurse. I called her Miss Nurse, and Coach Greedle's wife was the assistant nurse, I guess, district nurse, and we met and we met and we met, and we just continued to come up with we call it the reentry plan, and we thought of anything and everything that could have happened potentially, and we addressed it, and we addressed it, and we addressed it, and we addressed it, and then TEA would come up with something, and we'd go back to the drawing board. And finally, after we went back to the drawing board about 3 or 4 times, I said, we're not changing anymore. I like what we got. Well, then I think it was Andy that knows. He goes, read this. And I read it. And he goes, read it again. And it didn't say you must. TEA, when they would send something out, it was you can. And I said, okay, until they say we must, we're not changing anything else. This is what we're going to do. And I still remember, the news stations in, I think Tyler did it, and I know Shreveport, they wanted every district's reentry plan. And then you get a call, we would like to come and interview you guys, your team and your superintendent of your team. And they got there and they said, can you tell us how you, and I think they had 82 different reentry plans. This is one of the Shreveport State, KSLA, if I remember right. And they said, this is the absolute best one that we have. And I still remember that because that was a team. That wasn't Jerry Gibson. That we had a team working on things every single day to try to reopen the schools. I remember that. You remember this one? It was controversial. Back then you could do synchronous or asynchronous. You could stay home and learn if you wanted to. And I made the decision. I said, if you're going to stay home, that's fine. You can, and we said every 6 weeks you can either go synchronous or come back or what have you. And I said, I called the athletic director, the band director, everybody that had students, cheerleader, drill team, and I said, listen, if you have a student that says, I want to stay home and do my learning online, your online learning, I said, that's fine. We're allowing that. But they can't come to band practice. They can't come to football practice. If we really have a concern that I might get COVID, then you have a concern over all of it. We were,
That's right.
and yeah, little people question that. And I said, really? I mean, come on. In other words, I want to kind of take maybe the easy way out educationally, but I want to have my cake and eat it too. I said, we're not going to have those double standards. And so, um, yeah, you know, and there's times, David, going back to, of course, I started dealing with another district in November during COVID, and that was so selfish of me. We're trying to get through COVID. I shouldn't even have taken any back then because of our success. I was getting phone calls. Would you consider this one? Consider this one? Consider applying here and there. And I'm like, no, now's not the time to leave. Now is not the time to leave. We got to see this through for the sake of these kids because I love those kids. But once again, you can't go back and change the past. But
Right.
that was selfish of Jerry.
Well, and I tell people this all the time who I don't get asked the question much anymore, but I was like that whole 2021 school year after the spring of 2020 was all about getting through it. I mean, we were teaching and we were having school, but there were so many other requirements that we had to live with. I mean, we had to give a report every single day from every single campus, every single building in the district. And I know this because I had to do the report and gather it. Every single day of that school year, we had to do a report about our cases that day. And then we were doing at the end of the week a kind of a roundup of all of that. Had nothing to do with education at all. It was just it was paperwork. But I mean I just can't. It's just all about getting through this year and getting people healthy and getting them to the finish line and getting back to some sense of normalcy, which we did. And you did. You made the decision. Of course, you got the offer, and you did it for reasons that anyone could understand. You wanted to be closer to family down in Southeast Texas, and you did take the basically jump back into a situation in Galveston where you'd just come from when you came to Marshall. It was a turnaround type thing, going into a situation where they were going to try to pass a bond. And you mentioned that at the top of the show. And ironically, just a few months after you left, I chose to do what I do now, which is I started Right Team Services, and we got hooked up together. And I actually was fortunate enough to work alongside you during that bond process down in Galveston, which we got passed in May. Kind of, it was kind of ironic, and I believe I may have told you this throughout the 5 years that we worked together that the bonds I went through in Marshall were going to be my last. I would not do those again. And then the way you be careful what you say when God's listening, because
Yeah,
he
no
has a
doubt.
tendency to sometimes show you, oh, you're not. And you called me and we were able to work together on that. And that was enjoyable as well. But, you know, I hated you leaving. Everyone hated you leaving because of everything we had done. But that happens in life. It happens where sometimes we do things and we move on and take on other challenges. And you felt you needed to do that, and you did do some good things in Galveston. I mean, let's
Yeah,
be
I
honest.
think so.
You did a lot of
Yeah,
good things in Galveston, and had some pushback like you did everywhere. That's going to happen in leadership. It happens. No one who's ever been in a leadership position has always made everyone happy.
yeah. Well,
And
but it was a different pushback there. We had pushback at Marshall, but it was to our faces most of the time. Theirs was not. It was, keyboard warriors and taking to Facebook and everything and all of that. And I didn't realize going down there, and it wasn't told to me that, they had their own little group. I think as a Facebook group might ever, all eyes on GISD or something like that, and where everything that was done um, was kind of questioned, and there was pushback and what have you, and you know I tell people this is what I tell people. People that have in that are in that position and facing a decision on do I stay or do I go. Uh, you know, we had earned the respect of the majority of the community, respect of the board. I felt love from the community. Tammy and I felt love from the community. We felt love from the school board, and we also, in return, no, but we loved the community. We loved the school board. Tammy, for most of the time, worked at ETBU. We loved ETBU. And, the moral of the story kind of for me is, and this is what I tell other superintendents who call and say, do I stay or do I go? I said, if you have the love of the community, you have the support of, you have a good board and everything else, just don't leave. Don't leave because you don't know what you're going to have. What's still saying that the devil is better than the devil that you don't, And so um, I felt like I probably could have stayed as long as I wanted. I could have stayed until I retired right there in Marshall in a house that we loved and the community that we loved and all that good stuff. But yeah, the lure of I remember talking to Helen and she kind of tried to talk me out of it. You make the calls to the board members and everything else. And I remember saying we just feel like we have missed so much of our grandchildren's lives, of the events, various the ball games, some parties, and the board was understanding times I needed to go down there for a Friday graduation, pre-K or something like that. But they always understood that because they knew how hard and how the hours that we worked. But that's I remember there was I'm not going to name names. There was a coach in Marshall, and you'd let me know. Said, man, he's thinking about leaving like right now in the middle of the year. And I remember reaching out to him, and because I had known him for a number of years, and I just said, don't you think this through. I said, don't I say don't think it through. I said, think this through. I said, I'm just going to tell you from where I'm at. You have support, and if you have support, and there's good people there, I know this firsthand. Uh, just ride this out. I said because they're some of the best people I've met, some of the best people I know, and my biggest mistake was leaving. And so, and he did. He came back, came to senses. From what I understand, I wasn't there, but he, finished out the season and everything else. But you know, I've tried to use my experiences to try to help others, and I think that's what we need to do as Christians. I think God allows us to go through things, um, and maybe sometimes even sends us through things so that we're going to learn. Because our job is to minister to the people that are going through the struggle that we went through. And it's still a struggle. I haven't come out of it yet. It's still a struggle. And so but I try to minister. I after I went through tough times in Galveston, and there's been some other people that I know and some that I don't. And now I always, if I see where a superintendent is either left when under pressure or, forced out, whatever it might be, and I wasn't forced out, I left. It was my decision, but there was pressure there and everything else. And I reach out to them now and say, man, what can I do? I'm praying for you. And I just try to encourage those people. I use this struggle, and I made that commitment to the Lord that I would try to work with those people, anyone that would let me, and just be there for them, not judge them, just hold their hand. I remember my father, who was a Baptist preacher, one time he went to the hospital in the middle of the night or middle late at night. Somebody was having a heart attack, and I went with him. I said, "Can I go with you?" And first he said no, and he said yes. And I just sat back and I watched. I waited. We were driving back home. We didn't leave but about 5 minutes from the hospital, and I said, "Dad, how do you know what to say?" And my dad told me, he said, he said, son, they don't remember what you say. They remember that you were there. And so sometimes we just need to be there with people, as you've done for me for the last 3 years now. So,
Yeah. And we always have good conversations. I'll be honest. That's why I love talking to you because you have that perspective of be careful. The grass sometimes isn't always as green as it may appear on the other side. And you and I have had those deep discussions, and we talk faith with each other, and that's always something that I enjoy. Um, and look, and you say it's been what? It's been 3 years since you've
3 years.
left Galveston, and you're still in the game, so to speak. I mean, you're trying to catch
Right.
back on in retirement, but
Yeah.
and we continue to pray and trust that God's going to lead you down the way. But I do know that you have perspective and opinions on certain things from a superintendent perspective. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on some of these things that superintendents are facing today, a couple of them. And I don't really know how to present this question, so I'm just going to roll it out there and trust that you, as always, have an answer. Um, let's just call it budget challenges
Yeah.
every single year. And really, what I mean when I say that, let's be honest, it's political challenges. We don't have a whole lot of support from the current regime in our state toward public education, and anybody that disagrees with that is not reading the headlines and seeing where this is coming from. I'm specifically saying the whole school choice movement. And look, this is my opinion on it, and it is what it is, and you can disagree with it. Anybody out there who's listening, there's always been school choice in Texas.
Mhm.
You can always choose to pull your kid out of a public school and put them in a private school or homeschool them, and no one. I certainly say you do what's right for your kids and for your family, and so from that perspective, there's always been this public school choice. But the problem with what's happening now in our state and is now law, in my opinion, we're taking tax dollars and putting those, taking them. It's not so much giving it back to people where they can take it. It's taking it away from public schools without a plan that I can understand and see to replace that money.
Yeah.
And for years, even before all of this, money had steadily been being siphoned off. And I was thinking about this yesterday. It just kind of hit me as I was driving to church for some reason. What do people expect? If you've got a plan, fine. Let us know because I've never met a school administrator who enjoys having to manage public tax dollars. But that's what it is. And my question is, if anyone has an idea to properly fund our public schools in Texas, which are constitutionally driven, we in Texas we have to provide a free public education to the kids. If you've got a better plan than property taxes, let me know. And I'm sure every educator that I speak with and know personally would agree with you. Okay, we just know what we need to educate kids. Wherever that pot comes from, you just let us know. Right now, we manage what we're given, and that's through by and large property taxes, which gets steadily every year cut. So all of that to say, what are some of those challenges that you're sitting in a seat now as a superintendent and you're saying, okay, this is what we're dealing with, while also, living under the TEA's guidelines of what's required to be considered a successful school district?
And right now there's a think of somewhat of a there's an explanation of it's going to come to a push or whatever to eliminate property taxes altogether. And which is that going to remove the voice of the community when it comes to the school district? You it's kind of like if someone says, I'm going to volunteer in a position, you really can't hold them accountable because they're not really getting a paycheck or anything else. They're just volunteering. But when they get a paycheck, then people can be held accountable. You can always say, "Yeah, you can't tell me what to do." So if it ever comes to that my question is, does would the property people who are paying property taxes still have a voice? Because right now they have a voice, and so like one thing, David, I'm really kind of proud of is I kind of have a tree, I guess. They have coaching trees. All the people who coached under Dennis Parker who are now head coaches somewhere, or like Claude Mathis. I know you had him on a few weeks ago, and I have my tree. I think I've 5 or 6 that have worked in leadership. And where I was the superintendent that are now superintendents in the state of Texas. But I was talking to one of them she just got a position, Tracy Robinson, in Clarksville, which is also a turnaround situation that she's facing, that she's in the middle of. And when she got there, she goes, "Man, I'd love for you to come up here and work in basically in consulting with me." She goes, I just don't have the money." And I remember saying to her, I was like, "You have the money. You just got to know where to find it. There's money there." And we learned that in Marshall. We learned to stretch the dollar and find what we needed for our kids. The example is, the pavilion that they have, and being able to turf those fields. You and I talked about that a lot because we wanted to do that as revenue, chasing some revenue. You got to find nowadays, if you have the opportunity, you've got to be able to chase that revenue. You've got to find out, what you can do. And you and I kind of discovered when we renovated the 800,000 for the gym and the locker rooms, and then we renovated softball, then did the turf. Softball was already been renovated. The True Loves helped get that started for us. We wanted to have as nice of a locker room as ETBU, which is hard to do, by the way, but we came as close as we could. Baseball had been renovated a few times, but we put the turf down in the field, which really kind of topped off that renovation. But we wanted to use it as a chance to chase some revenue and host playoff games and some summer camps and college previews, things like that. And so, um, I think that's one thing that school districts kind of have to do. Not all of them have that opportunity. Of course, we sat at the corner. We sat at the what would be the word, not the corner, but the axis of 59 and 20. So easy to get there. We do have you do have nice eating places there and some things. And we were like, well, I'm just chasing playoff games. So those that are facing those challenges, and I agree with you. School. There's always been school choice, and even when they did open enrollment. Marshall kind of learned the hard way on that one. Open enrollment. A lot of our kids went to Hallsville. Some went to Wascom. Some went to Legion Fields. Some went to Jefferson. I remember all that. The cool thing was a lot of those guys came back when we improved our schools. Uh, but so yeah, there's been school choice, and then it went to a different level. Um, there's a flip side of what you're talking about. So one thing that I began to do after I left Galveston was I began to work with an individual, and we had an opportunity. There was after a school shooting, the first school shooting that was really public was in Nashville, Tennessee, at a private school. Was in Nashville, Tennessee, at a private school there, and there was I think 3 or 4 kids that were killed. In fact, it was a church school, and the pastor's daughter was one that was killed. But there became federal money all of a sudden. They said, we're going to give federal money to private schools in the area of school safety. And I worked with a guy trying to, because I could kind of speak the superintendent language or head of school language, whatever it might be, and tell them there's money that is out there. And it was so much, I don't remember how much it was now, 2,300 per student, that it had to go to certain things, and it had to you could improve your campus. You could put fencing up, you could put cameras up. There's a lot of different things, and there was some parameters there. And you know what, David? I thought that was just like, that's free money. These guys are going to want this. This is it. And you know how many, a lot of them were like, we don't want this. And I'm like, help me understand this free money. Well, nothing's free. And if it's coming from the federal government, the next thing they're going to want to do is tell us what we can and cannot do as a private school. And a lot of days they didn't want to cross that. And I've heard some that I'm not sure if they want to, perhaps they want to get into the voucher game for that very reason. So I still think there's a lot of things that have got to get ironed out. I know this will be the first year here in a few weeks where the voucher money is there. We align a lot of things. I'm like you. I heard a podcast the other day that you were doing where you talked about the NIL thing. I'm like you. I always thought scholarship was a good payment. You're getting your education paid for, and you get a little meal money along the way. But I don't understand this. And what started out as somebody saying the school's making money off my name. Yeah, are they making $3 million a year off your name? Probably not by selling your jersey. But and I'm like you, the banana ball. I still remember when Lefty played for Savannah Bananas back when it was legitimate college league baseball and everything else. I don't understand the hype there, but I also don't understand exactly how the voucher thing is going to pan out. And so, my answer always was, and if anytime I've interviewed for a job, and they talked about students transferring out. What are we going to do about that? about the voucher, about growing private schools or whatever it is, you know, our answer has got to be as educators, we're just going to have to do it better than a private school, but we also have to offer more choices. Our vocational classes and the certifications that they can get. Whether it be diesel mechanics through TSTC there, or now underwater welding through there, and what have you. You know, you don't usually get those opportunities at a private school. So until it ever gets totally figured out, or maybe should I say, if it ever gets totally figured out, districts have got to learn there's money there. We got to find it. We've got to chase revenue, but you've got to do it better and you've got to offer more so that students say, I might want that private school education, but I'm not going to be able to reach my goals if I do that. And nothing against the private schools. I've interviewed at some private schools, and would go there happily, and if offered the right opportunity. But that's the key, I think, for the public schools.
Yeah, I agree. And what's that famous statement by President Reagan? The most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and, when you get money from a government entity, federal government, state government, whatever, don't think it's free money, because they will, in most cases, are going to want something for that money.
yeah.
And that includes vouchers. So and that was my biggest thing from a private school perspective, because I also had 12 years in a private school background at higher education at ETBU. But when you take federal money, they do expect you to kind of give them get their foot in the door a little bit. Um, and it's not, like I said, it's not always roses and rainbows when you do that. And that brings up another question here I wanted, and we're going to wrap this up here pretty soon, but I know you got stuff to do and things like that. But I wanted to get your take, because you and I are both believers, and this is when I share my opinion on this, Doc, I get a little bit of wide eyes from some people who can't really understand what I'm saying here. But this teaching Bible in schools, in public schools. Listen, I'm all for spreading the gospel, and I'm all for teaching the Word of God to everyone. I don't want anyone to take that any other way than what I just said. I don't know how I feel about the government saying that you will learn this in a public school setting, and here's why. Last year it was the Ten Commandments that were put up. That was deemed, and that sounds really great. That really sounds great. But you and I both know, in a public school, you can't just put up one set of beliefs. And we were dealing with this. I don't think you were there. I think it was Dr. Smith when we dealt with this. We were getting a push locally to do end of school day Bible clubs, I believe at the high school, which sounded great. My biggest fear with that was, well, it wasn't necessarily a fear. It was, what happens if we have another group that wants to come up here and teach something different? You have to open your doors for that. And so, you know, at the time, I was kind of torn. I said, well, okay, fine. Let's have a little bit of competition here and see who goes where, and what catches and what doesn't. But it's a slippery slope when you start having a government come in and say, you know, you have to teach Bible. You have to teach religion of any kind in a school outside of a history class. But I wanted to get your take on that, because it's not that I don't want to spread the word of God, the knowledge of that amongst our younger generation. I think we really need that. But I also understand how the government works, and you kind of open yourself up to other things like we just talked about, where the government tells you how you have to teach that. And I don't know so much that I agree with that from the freedom aspect that we live under in our country. But I wanted to get your thoughts as a school administrator who has to probably tackle that going into this year.
Yeah. Um, yeah, when you were going through and kind of laying the groundwork there, I was thinking back to '07, '08, '09, somewhere in that neighborhood when you were allowed to teach Bible. And I questioned it then. I was a principal at the time. And, of course, it's being taught as a book of history, a history book. Okay. Now, and I'm like you, Dave, and we talk about this and, spend a lot of time talking about, God, the things of God and direction. And, I've really been in a valley or in wilderness, just wondering, God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why am I still in this valley? You know my heart. You know that things that have been said. That you know the truth and what is a lie and everything else. And um, sometimes where I felt alone, and you're so close on some jobs and it falls apart. And I've asked that. So being a believer that I like to think that I'm strong in my faith. First of all, you're 100% right. So, and we went through this. I didn't do the after school Bible club or before school or when wherever it is. And of course, you make it optional. You don't require them to go. But I did face every year, and I faced it in Marshall. Gideon's coming in and saying we would like to go into the schools and give a copy of the New Testament. They call it a testament, New Testament to every student and everything. And um, you know, I'm all for spreading the gospel. I'm all for getting scripture, and it might be the only Bible that some of those kids get. Because of my stance and what I believe and how I live, I think it's a great thing. But from a responsibility and accountability standpoint, if you open it up there and you say, yes, you can come in, then anyone else that wants to teach something that we basically probably as Christians, New Testament Christians anyway, don't align with, you got to, they also, you're going to lose a lawsuit. Remember my old saying, I don't mind going to court. I mind losing when I go to court. Um, you're going to go to court and you're going to lose. And so that is such a slippery slope. When the New Testament, excuse me, the Ten Commandments, I was like you. My thing is there's a thing called separation of church and state. When you're forcing someone to put that up, uh, I don't necessarily see how they can be forced to do that. I really don't, because most school districts, there are a few that don't have this word, independent. Marshall Independent School District, Cold Spring Oakhurst Independent, Waco Independent School District. There are some that, when I was in Cold Spring, it's Cold Spring Oakhurst Consolidated Independent. Through another word, because two communities at one time had consolidated, or two school districts way back. There's a history. So I don't understand totally, though I think it's a great thing. I think, yeah, you can sit and say our country is founded on Christian morals. They can do all of the above. Um, for me as a person, as a Christian, I didn't have a problem with it. But as the educator who sees both sides of the aisle there, yeah, I think it's a dangerous thing, a concern.
Yeah,
Without being judgmental. But
yeah,
yeah, this is one of those where you would step, if we were in Marshall together, you'd step in and you grab my coat
yeah,
and say,
yeah.
"Look here."
I'm going to cut you off there, because it is. And again, I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying or what you're saying. We we believe that God's word determines every part of our lives. Hopefully, I mean that's you and I know
Yeah,
we fail more than we succeed at that, but
yeah,
that's how we try to live our lives on a daily basis. And I want to share that with everyone that I come in contact with, either verbally or by my actions. And that is a goal. That's the goal of my everyday life, hopefully. But in doing that, I don't know that the schoolhouse is necessarily the best way to do that because, and I'm going to get in trouble when I say this, but I'm going to say it. And I'm going to try to say it with as much love as possible. Um, the You should not have to be taught and depend on a school to teach your children what's in God's word because it should be taught at home.
I
That's
disagree.
how I believe that. Um, and part of the problem why I think this has become such an issue, people say we need God back in our school, and I agree 100%. But you and I both know that gets blown out of proportion. We've seen on countless occasions our own students leading prayer and Bible study in schools everywhere, and that is 100% legal. The problem with that comes into it is when they're forced to do that by policy, right? Um, and I just believe this: you give the kid again. It goes back to our discussion with kids. You give the kids an opportunity, and that's really what education is about: is just giving kids opportunities to shine and grow and find where their place is, right? Whether that's in athletics, whether that's in fine arts, whether that's in the classroom. You give them as much opportunity to be who God created them to be. That's kind of the thing with our faith in school. You give them opportunities to grow in their faith without directing them one way or the other. Because God has proven over the centuries, He can take care of that. The Holy Spirit takes care of that if you provide enough opportunities. I believe part of our problem that we're talking about here, honestly, between you and me and everyone who may be listening, is that let's be honest, we don't give them much opportunity at home anymore, and that's really to me where the problem is, and that's caused this push wherever it's coming from. I still think it's a political thing. I think it's to get votes, and I don't know. I've yet to see how it's going to stand up in a court of law. We'll see, but it makes me always uncomfortable, Doc, when I hear a push from the government to try to put quote God back in school when I believe God's already there and He doesn't need
I know
our.
he left.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't
look,
know He left. And we've done a lot to try to keep Him out of school, but I don't think He ever left. As long as what is it? What is the scripture? When two or more gathered in my name. Well, I promise you, there are more than two kids at any given high school on any given day who love the Lord Jesus Christ as their Savior and are committed to that first and foremost, and can do whatever they want because that's their constitutional right, their freedom of religion. So I don't know, man. I get very nervous in anything when the government says you have to do this, because then when somebody else comes up and says, "Okay, well, you let them do it, now I have to be able to do it," and you can't legally deny them that.
right.
And then that again, that goes back to what we talked about with confusion. You
I
end
was
up
gonna, I was gonna say what you said. Is it is it being done for political gain, or is it being done because we're really spiritually concerned with what's going on? And I don't want to sit in judgment. It's not my job. I've been judged enough in the last 3 years. Um, if if it's being done for spiritual concerns and spiritual reasons, then I have to say that those that are doing this and pushing this, where are they spiritually in their own life? And I probably should just leave it at that. Then
I
it
agree.
becomes a
I agree.
political thing.
And on
Um,
top of all of that, I mean, when it first came out, when you hear that's great, we're finally doing this, and I'm like, okay, here's another thing that I'm concerned about: who's teaching the class? You know,
what is their
um,
background? What is
their
their background?
background? What is, and there are a lot of good Bible teachers out there. I don't want to
Yeah,
intimate that, but I don't know that there's one for every school in the state to teach
well, you'd
this.
be lucky. Say in Marshall, they'd be lucky. They have ETB in the background, and they also have Wiley, who has a Methodist background in their history, so they could probably pull it off. They
Right.
could probably get a few quote unquote adjunct people to come in and do what they do with Matthew and everything else. But not everybody. I interviewed with a district way out. It was kind of considered a rural district between Palestine and Crockett. They would be hard pressed other than a local pastor. Well, now you're getting into, is it a Methodist pastor or a Baptist pastor, Assembly
Sure.
God, or is it a priest? So it's just such a slippery slope. It is such a slippery slope. But I totally, once again, we align like we do on so many other things, NIL, all that other stuff. But This is another one that will be interesting, and it will be challenged in the court of law for probably for a little while. I think that if I'm not mistaken, the Ten Commandments, they sided with those who said that it had to you have to put them up. I think, and there's still some districts saying we're not going to. That's another thing. Okay, well, Commissioner Morath, man, I respect you and appreciate you, and I consider you I wouldn't say a friend, but someone that I know and enjoy working with. That's going to put a better pray for him, because it's going to put a situation on him. You're told
Right.
you have to do it, but no, we're not going to do it. Then
Yeah.
what happens?
I just think the best thing we could do as a public to support our schools is pray for them. That's the number one
No,
thing.
I agree.
It's not forcing somebody to study the Bible. It's not necessarily putting Ten Commandments up. I don't understand the pushback against that. I mean, it's what are you so afraid of that you don't agree with the Ten Commandments? Basically, every legal system we have in the world is based off of those Ten Commandments, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
on the flip side of that, I kind of chuckle a little bit about the pushback against it. What are you so afraid of that our kids can't see that? And how many times are kids going to actually read those on a wall somewhere? So, it's an interesting thing to talk about, and it always is. Of course, everyone has an opinion, and it's usually different. I just want people to know where I personally stand, and I know where you stand, and a lot of people in education. We're too busy still trying to catch up with some of the state regulations when it comes to math and reading and all of that kind of stuff to educate kids to a point where they can make a decision and say, you know what, I do want to go study more and learn more about God's word. I want to be able to read it for myself. Um, but they have to be able to read to do that,
exactly,
and develop
exactly.
comprehension skills. And you get that by and large, your faith is grown at home and with your church family. And that would be the two things that I would, and I know we're kind of wandering here, but if I could just tell anyone out there, you know, your faith is going to grow by your family life and how you're in your home and join a church, get involved in your church. But God can meet you in the hallway and in the classroom already. You don't need a state government to tell you that now it's okay to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. It'll see how it works. We'll see how it works out for sure.
Okay, I didn't mean that to become a sermon all of a sudden today. I do that enough, but I did want to ask that question because you and I haven't talked about that, and schools are facing that right now, and I hope it goes well, and I hope if it's handled in the right way, it'll be done in a gospel kind of way, and it'll be a good thing. But be careful whenever you allow the government to come in there because they start telling you what you have to teach that may not necessarily be in God's word. And it says, and it can create more problems than it solves.
Absolutely. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Going back to the Ten Commandments, they used to be up in the rooms, and they were required to take them down, and now they're trying. It's hard to put the genie back in the bottle. But anyway, I agree. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting days ahead.
Very interesting days. And man, you and I have talked for a long time. We could talk longer. I
Yeah,
mean,
we could. Yeah, I
there
was
is
thinking,
no shortage of story. We didn't even get into what you and I were going back and forth over the last week. You corrected me. You mentioned Coach Mathis and all of that. That was apparently I got it wrong, according to you, and kudos on your memory skills because I think you were right. But he and I got it wrong. But on how all of that transpired, we didn't even mention he and I or talk about how he kind of, and I'm saying this jokingly, Coach, if you ever listen to this, um, he kind of cinched the deal on his own part when he invited us to SMU, and we sat in the luxury box alongside himself, and I think we met Chad Morris at the time, who was the head coach at
yeah, we had met
SMU.
him before before we
And
went up there. We met him in the
yeah,
office.
and
Yeah.
just kind of it was almost like we were being recruited ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, and I remember telling you, and I believe on our committee that we did that interview with. Here we are talking about it. I said we were going to stop, but you know, we had Miss Brown, Tina Brown was on that committee, and Jason Black, who was at the
Jason
time
Black. Yep.
was our junior high principal, and myself and you. And we all loaded up in a district vehicle and drove to Dallas and met Claude and Chad and basically every other SMU coach at the time there at I believe it's Gerald Ford Stadium. Saw their
Force them. Yeah.
facility, And we literally conducted that interview, which you corrected me, that was the second final interview that we did with Coach. From there, from that luxury box in front of that beautiful stadium, how can you not offer a guy a job when you're in that setting?
Well,
So kudos to Coach Mathis for pulling that off.
well, actually, so you set it up when I was listening to that one correctly. We did not want everyone in East Texas to know this is who we're going after, because there might be some bigger schools or something that said, oh wait, we want this guy, he's a proven winner. I wanted so desperately to fly in under the radar so that we could, we made the coaching hire of the year that year for sure. And so yeah, I was like, we're not bringing this man to Marshall. I remember you actually FaceTime with him and showed him the weight room and showed him the offices and everything else when nobody was in there. But that was it wasn't that we wanted to show off or anything else. I just didn't want to lose him to someone else because I felt like I remember I gave him three directives. I was like, look, I need three things: restore us to the football glory that we're used to. Um, another was, to fix girls athletics, because we'd gone the year before over and we had not won a district game in volleyball, basketball, or softball, and we needed those girls to. They needed the attention, and that's when we moved Jody over there, Satterwhite, to be the assistant AD over girls
Right.
athletics. And it was, but yeah, there was a third one that I said I need you to really work on it, and he did. I still remember you talked about Skeet, of course, such a history there in Marshall. He came to me, and DeSoto had opened up, and Claude came to me, and Coach Mathis came to me, and I told him, and it was hard for me to say this. I said, you need to go. I didn't want to lose him because I knew we had more, that we could have done as a school and everything else with his leadership. But as good of a football coach as Claude Mathis is, he's a better father. He
Mm-hmm.
loves his children. He loves his children so much, and he was just getting to be a part-time dad. He had Champ there with him, but he had the twins, and he had his daughter, who was a great track athlete. And I remember telling Skeet that he said, "You just gave him a freedom to go," and I was like, "But it's the right thing for the person. It was
Right.
the right thing for
Well,
Coach
that
Mathis."
was the deal where, too, and again, that shows your leadership, unselfish leadership. But when we were talking, we had a lot of things to work through because Claude had had so much success and to develop even a name then in high school. Kind of surprising that he went to the college game when he did. But when we heard via, I believe it was Skeet himself that told you that
I
he
think
had
Skeet
heard.
called me. Yeah,
And
yeah,
everybody in Marshall and really East Texas knows who we're talking about when we say Skeet. God rest his soul. Man, the world
yes.
misses Skeet. But I think the biggest success story that you and I can say out of that is that I think for the most part, we kept him quiet, which was which was an accomplishment even itself, because everyone who remembers Skeet knows how excitable and how much he loved the Marshall Mavericks.
Do you remember?
And
I
he
wouldn't
was
take
like
his.
a kid on Christmas morning when he found out we had actually interviewed Claude Mathis for that job.
I had actually would not take his phone calls. I wouldn't do it because I know Skeet, and I told him when we finally talked again about 10 days later or whatever. He said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just can't help myself. I knew it wasn't because he was a bad guy. He wanted the best for the Marshall Mavericks and those kiddos, and he ministered to so many of those kids. But I knew that it would get out, and the whole thing we're trying to do is keep it quiet. And so, yeah, I couldn't. I had to, had to not take his calls, and it hurt me. But he understood. He said, "You did the right thing. You did the right thing." Yeah, and but also you look at that. Coach Greedle, we didn't bumped him up to be our head coach. I think he stayed 3 or 4 seasons and went to playoffs every year but one, if I remember right. But now look, he's gone on to Bastrop, and this last year went either 3 or 4 rounds and in the playoffs went 9-1. I mean, look, that also came out of that because we got him from Lake Travis, and now look at his career and how well he's doing. So Coach
Well, the good
Babineau
thing
is
about
now a head
that,
coach at Baylor.
the Mavs are doing okay. I mean, Marshall football is Marshall football, and Claude's obviously doing okay up there at DeSoto. So I think it worked out
Yeah.
for everybody. But anyway, the experience of doing that was just one of those things that you and I shared together with a very select few at the time, and I'd never done anything like that. And man, there was a little bit of a rush to it, and being able to keep a secret and see if we could do it. And I think for the most part, based on everything I know, we were able to get it done because I think it was a huge shock when we made that announcement. And that was fun as a PR guy to be able to make that scoop and let everybody know, oh, by the way, this is our next coach. So that
We
was a
brought
fun
him in.
time.
We hit him in our offices. Then we went to school board meeting and we named him
We
and brought him
did.
down there. And then we went across and did a press conference in the field house. And uh, yeah, that was. I remember during those times. Anytime a coach would leave, would you say, "Get off of Smoky. Don't look. You wouldn't let me look at Smoky.com. Get off
Yeah,
Smoky.
I
You
tried
don't
to
need me
keep
looking
you
at what
off
they're
of
saying."
the websites in general,
Yeah,
but yeah, and I
yeah.
had to tell him that too. I was like, hey, there's going to be some things said and said, but hey, don't don't look at it, don't do it,
I'd
and
hire him
we
again.
we
I
could
would
that
hire
was
him
so much
again.
fun. That was so much fun, and you know we were able to get it done. But man, so many other things we could talk about that we'll save for another time. But just kind of tell me as we get ready to go here, kind of what your plans are. Right? You know, I know some of them are, and you've already talked. You still, even though you are officially retired, you still had that itch a little bit, right? To continue to
Work
help
with
kids.
students, to work with
Yeah.
children. Yeah, I don't necessarily. Yeah, I've interviewed for a few superintendent's jobs and gotten close on a few, and interviewed a few service center, and I also have interviewed at private school for an assistant principal's job, and there was question was, well, the elephant in the room was, why do you want? I said, I just want to serve. I just want to be around kids again. Still got, I still got energy. I still got juice in the battery and everything else, and my wife always said way back when, even when I was in Marshall, she'd say, you won't do good in retirement. And so, yeah, it's kind of a semi-retirement thing. I look for open doors and sometimes I wonder, and you've been such a great friend on me this journey. Why, God, why am I having to go through this? Why I feel like, the enemy is winning. How long is this going to go on? Because if people can Google the name and you can see all this stuff I saw something where someone recently said, "Oh, just Google it," and someone said, "I did," and they said, "Yeah, there's two sides to every story," and a lot of times, people who really know me know that some of the stuff that was written in 2023 is just, so far out there by, various newspaper sources or whatever. And then of course, everybody picks up on it. But, David, it's been a challenge this morning in my quiet time. I was, reading about, I talked to you earlier about, going through a valley, and then some of the valleys in Israel that when they had to go through them, the only time they could see was at direct noon because the sun was beating straight down. It was so deep that they couldn't take those steps. And when the steps weren't there, I mean, when the sun wasn't there, if they were going to step, they just stepped one step at a time. And so, if God's not finished with me and He wants to use me, then I'm certainly open to that. And if this is it, if this is my lot in life, and it's been spiritually, and I've talked to you about this. If I left Marshall and I stepped out of God's will, then I've confessed that. I hope that it's not going to be held against me by the Lord forever. There's times I'm like, God, just teach me what you're trying to please. I want to learn. I want to, obviously I'm being taught something. And so, yeah, I just keep casting the net. I've cast it different, a different approach than before. Where I just want to serve. I'll go be an assistant principal somewhere. I'd love to. And as I went to Bloomington as an assistant football coach, offensive coordinator after 17 years being out of coaching. And I remember walking into Lane Shands, who I still love. He's mad at me right now. I wasn't able to go there. He wanted me to come in the spring, but I wasn't able to do it for financial reasons. And, I walked in there and I said, Coach, he was a first year athletic director and a first year head football coach. I'd been both of those. And I said, don't look over your shoulder. I'm not here for your job. I just want to make you look good. And I want to support you and give you the support that you need. And that's my attitude. I'd go to somewhere. I don't have to. I don't want to. I don't know if I want to be a superintendent, but I'd go somewhere and people see that on your resume and they're like, "Well, wait a minute. Are you going to come in here and try to under?" No, 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 no. I just want to go and make a superintendent look good, or go somewhere and make a principal look good, or make a athletic director look good. I just want to work with kids and try to be a positive influence in their lives. And so, God knows what the future holds. I certainly do not. But even if it means that's it, the career's over, then I will accept that. Um, I don't necessarily think that's fair, but people have. There's some that have taken and written their own narratives.
Yeah.
And they take a nugget and they make it into a false story. And
yeah. Well, I'll just say this, and we'll close with this. And I don't know who I'm speaking to out there, but this man is a genuine leader. He is a genuine. One thing about it, and it's a good and a bad thing, and you and I have talked about this ever since you and I first met, is that you say what's on your mind and on your heart, and sometimes that gets us all in trouble when we do that.
It's
or
Jerry in trouble for sure.
it is, and there is no malice meant ever by it. It's just sometimes there's a proper place and time for everything, and we all are like that. But I would tell you this: I know your heart, and I know I've watched you in action, and I've seen the success. And I've most of all, particularly in education, your heart is where the kids are and what's best for kids. And along the way, yes, you impact adults. Some people may disagree, and that's fine. But I would recommend you for any position in education, and I do hope that you do get that next opportunity if God allows it, because we could use you. You still have a lot to give, and so.
And I have shifted. I've taught adjunct. I've taught University of Houston at Clear Lake and downtown, because if I can use what I know and what I've learned to teach the next generation of administrators and or teachers, I've really enjoyed that. So I just want to give back. I appreciate you and your friendship more than I can ever show you.
And always, and I just don't. And you said it earlier. Someone else said that there's always two sides to every story, and don't ever believe what you see on the surface on an internet. Call me; I can tell you the whole story. I know it. I know everything about it. But don't believe what's on the internet, because a lot of times that's not even a half truth in many instances. And unfortunately, in our society, we live in a social media world where everything is immediate, and we don't do our research. And that's a whole nother issue for another podcast. But you're a good man, you're a good educator, you're a good leader, and I'm telling you, somebody somewhere is going to get a good man in Jerry Gibson on their team, and that's going to be good for your team. So, that's me kind of blowing up your shirt a little bit, but it's true. It's true, my friend.
Thank you, my friend, for sure. So.
Well, I want to thank everyone out there for joining us today on Schoolhouse Rocks here on the Right Team podcast. Once again, I want to thank my guest, my very special guest, Dr. Jerry Gibson, for hopping on the podcast with me today. Man, I could think of no better guest to have on with school getting ready to start literally just around the corner. You've done that a lot at this time of year, and there is a little bit of energy in the building when students are about to come back.
Yeah, definitely.
If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to check us out on YouTube at The Right Team Podcast. You can also follow us on Facebook for additional content and updates you don't want to miss. Stay tuned, subscribe, and do not miss an episode. We've got something for everyone on this podcast. Thank you for listening and supporting us from right here in the heart of the East Texas Piney Woods. Have a great day, everybody. Stay cool out there in this brutal heat. Is it hot down there in the Houston area?
Yeah, 101 today. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to be sitting right here in the coolness of air conditioning most of the day. But I do want to encourage everyone to enjoy the last couple of weeks of summer break. Most importantly, as always, until next time, keep writing your story.
At Hallsville ISD, we believe leadership is measured by service. Congratulations to our own Rihanna, DePaula Jund, and Peyton Rice, recipients of Congressman Moran's Congressional Service Award. Rihanna's leadership has inspired countless acts of service, including helping lead a campus food drive that collected more than 1,100 items for local families. Peyton's dedication transformed the Hallsville ISD Care Closet through his Eagle Scout project and hundreds of volunteer hours. We're proud to celebrate these outstanding students who are making a lasting difference in our schools and our community. Hallsville ISD, committed to excellence, opportunities, and service. Go Bobcats!
Parents, students, and Jacket Nation, mark your calendars. Join us for the Jacket Nation Back to School Bash on Thursday, August 6th from 5 to 7 p.m. at the Old Elementary School. It's a fun evening for the whole community featuring school supplies, food, and snow cones as we get ready for an exciting new school year. Don't miss this great opportunity to connect with friends, prepare for the first day of school, and celebrate together. We'll see you August 6th from 5 to 7 at the Old Elementary School. Go Jackets!
Parents and guardians, Karnak ISD is gearing up for the 2026 to 2027 school year. Registration packets will be available beginning Tuesday, July 28th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the school office. New students should schedule an appointment and bring the required enrollment documents, while transfer and returning students will also need proof of residency and other required paperwork. Please remember that online registration will not be available this year, and completed enrollment packets for returning students are due by August 5th. Check out our Karnak ISD Facebook page to learn more.
Smackover Norflet School District is more than a school system in the great state of Arkansas. We're a family. From award-winning academics and fine arts programs to championship athletics and hands-on learning opportunities, Buckaroo students are building bright futures every single day. Whether it's celebrating student success, supporting our community, or creating unforgettable memories in the classroom, Smackover Norflet is proud to inspire excellence from preschool to graduation. Join the tradition. Join the Buckaroo family. Smackover Norflet School District. We are one family.
Friday nights are built on teamwork, and so are we at Styles Electric. Just like the best teams in East Texas, success starts with hard work, dedication, and people you can count on. That's why Styles Electric is looking for the next great teammate. Whether you're an experienced electrician or ready to learn the trade, there's a place for you on a team that's powering commercial projects across East Texas. Don't sit on the sidelines. Step into a career with a company that's been getting the job done for over a quarter century. Call 903-235-2536 or visit styleselectric.com. Styles Electric. Reliable, professional, experienced.
For months, you've asked one question. When is the Right Team Daily coming back? The wait is almost over. Beginning Monday, August 31st, your favorite daily podcast returns with the stories that educate, inspire, and remind us why history still matters. Every day, we'll discover the incredible events that shaped our world, celebrate the birthdays of remarkable people, remember those whose legacies continue to impact us today, and close each episode with a biblical word of encouragement to help you face the day ahead. Whether you're driving to work, enjoying your morning coffee, or simply looking for a few minutes of inspiration, the Right Team Daily is your daily source for history, reflection, faith, and inspiration. Mark your calendar for August 31st. Follow the podcast wherever you listen, and get ready to start each morning informed, encouraged, and inspired. The Right Team Daily returns August 31st. Until then, as always, keep writing your story.